There are two goals for the child support system in the United States. The first is to provide material support for custodial parents to alleviate child poverty. The second is to uphold parental responsibility for non-custodial parents following a divorce or a separation. Child support attempts to achieve both goals by collecting payments from non-custodial parents and distributing cash assistance or other government benefits to custodial parents. Much of the United States' current child support system is based on aid to families with dependent children. This was a New Deal-era federal program, and it sought to give states the abilities to provide cash payments to families with children in need. Need was determined by income, or by lack of parental ability to provide for their children. The program originally excluded Black families from receiving benefits, but following the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s, the program became more accessible to non-white women. As the program expanded, white racial resentment and fiscal conservatism fomented during the 1980s, with Ronald Reagan's accusations of welfare queens. This led to discontent with the way that welfare and child support in the United States was structured. Critics like Charles Murray, a racist author and libertarian political scientist, argued that aid to families with dependent children was discouraging both marriage and work. The 1980s heralded massive cuts to public assistance, and it culminated with the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. This replaced aid to families with dependent children with a new program called Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, or TANF. TANF created work requirements for welfare recipients. It imposed a 5-year time limit for recipients to find employment before their benefits ran out, and it required custodial parents to work with child support enforcement in order to receive assistance. These requirements led to a dramatic decrease in the number of people receiving benefits, and it increased the participation of single mothers in the labor force by 10%. However, the program had mixed results in reducing poverty. Many of the jobs that parents gained after leaving TANF were low-wage occupations. Additionally, the requirement to cooperate with public child support meant that states used child support enforcement to target non-custodial parents in welfare cost recovery schemes. These schemes used tactics like income withholding, tax refund interception, suspension of driver's licenses, liens on personal property and real estate. In extreme cases, it went as far as incarcerating non-custodial parents that don't comply with child support orders or that fell behind on their payments. And this still goes on today. The revenues from these proceeds are shared between state and federal government, and much of the proceeds go directly back into TANF to meet minimum funding obligations for states to aid needy families. It's not as bad as it was when the program first started, but welfare cost recovery still exists. There are multiple burdens to children, custodial parents, and governmental institutions when a non-custodial parent is not in compliance with their child support obligations. Consistent and sizable child support payments do alleviate child poverty, and it reduces the amount of financial strain on custodial parents following a separation. Non-custodial non-compliance with child support, either through late payments, insufficient payments, or through the complete inability to pay, creates financial hardship for custodial parents. But it can also lead to massive debt obligations and other punitive actions taken against the non-custodial parent. Non-compliance with child support obligations create conditions that worsen child poverty, and it leads to an abdication of parental responsibility by non-custodial parents in providing for their children. Welfare cost recovery schemes are primarily viewed as punitive by non-custodial parents, and it does not encourage co-parenting or bonding between children and the non-custodial parent, and it sure doesn't encourage them to pay when they know that the money is just going back into the welfare program that's targeting them. Non-compliance with child support is primarily a problem with the inability to pay. Most child support that is due is collected by the government on time, and most non-custodial parents have incomes above the poverty line and can make their payments. However, there's nearly $111 billion in total owed child support arrears, and over 70% of this debt is over 10 years old and it's owed by non-custodial parents making less than $10,000 a year. Child support enforcement tactics, such as income withholding rates of up to 65%, license suspension, and the threat of prison for non-compliance, also discourage employment and do not increase the probability of receiving payment. So this debt is largely uncollectible. An additional issue with TANF is that the block grant given to states has totaled $16.5 billion annually since the creation of the program in 1996, and this amount has not been touched since then. Adjusting for inflation, this means that the money that states receive to provide these benefits has dropped over 40% since the program's inception. Obviously, this means less money for direct cash assistance. But what it also means is that the program has less money to spend on employment and training programs like transitional jobs, subsidized employment, and these programs have been shown to increase the ability for non-custodial parents to raise their incomes and to fulfill their child support obligations. Despite the dwindling pool of money, the role of child support enforcement has shifted away from welfare cost recovery. It shifted more towards increasing the share of collection distributed as payments to families. The reason that TANF has remained a cost-effective program, despite reduced funding and a shift away from welfare cost recovery, has been a focus on reducing administrative costs through increased automation and by a massive decline in caseloads. In 1999, the Child Support Enforcement Program had 19 million cases to process, and TANF had over 12.6 million recipients, the vast majority of whom were children. In 2021, Child Support Enforcement had a caseload of 12.6 million, and TANF served under 2 million recipients. Child poverty rates were 20.5% when TANF was introduced in 1996, and that number has dropped to 15.3% in 2021. However, there's been wide variability in childhood poverty rates over TANF's program history, and attributing all successes in lower incidence of child poverty today to TANF would be misleading. The point I'm trying to make is that TANF introduced massive work requirements for its recipients, who primarily were single mothers and their children. It forced recipients to answer invasive and personal questions regarding paternity and subsequent cooperation with child support enforcement to engage in collection efforts against the non-custodial parents. This potentially strained already tense, if existent at all, co-parenting relationships. The program did show promise in the early years of its implementation of reducing childhood poverty rates and getting parents self-sufficient and into the labor force. However, those gains were offset by lost welfare benefits for program participants, creating little to no changes in their individual incomes, but increased working hours. The underfunding of TANF and subsequent employment and training programs, coupled with the impact of the 2008 recession, have also led to less opportunities and worse outcomes for program participants. In layman's terms, this means that TANF forced single moms to work low-wage jobs to qualify for meager benefits for their children who were largely experiencing poverty at the same rates as before the program was introduced. The strict reporting requirements and minimal support also likely discouraged many from applying for benefits in the first place. All the while, TANF forced recipients to cooperate with the government to interrogate, investigate, and basically rob or incarcerate poor, non-custodial parents for their non-compliance with payments of unrealistic amounts of child support for their income level, while the government pocketed much of the money for welfare cost recovery. TANF, child support enforcement, and the state of child welfare in the United States show the need for systems-level change to empower and uplift parents and children alike, end poverty, and to affirm the dignity and worth of all people. People on TANF or that use formal child support systems rely on institutions that exist within a broader culture, and this culture is shaped by capitalism, individualism, and a celebration of work at the cost of welfare. This act was designed by legislators that valued a certain type of family composition, it prioritized working over helping, and it felt that high caseloads with aid to families with dependent children were a sign of the failures of the welfare system. instead of the failures of capitalism. The cultural values of those in power exert their force on those who rely on these systems for aid. This social system has shaped the way that child support enforcement can cast non-custodial parents in arrears on child support payments as deadbeat parents, or custodial parents that aren't working raising their children as lazy and undeserving. These social sanctions may shape the way that punitive enforcement techniques are used and justified. We should all be interested in ending poverty and bettering outcomes for individuals, families, and society at large. Both TANF and the child support system are failing the people they claim to serve. Over the past decade, half as many TANF applications have been approved, despite an increasing amount of unspent TANF funds at the state level. TANF and the child support system have the potential to help end child poverty. However, the goal of these programs was never to end poverty. These programs were designed to get people off of welfare, save the government money, and push people into jobs. Little regard if those jobs were actually helping make their lives better. Requirements to cooperate with child support enforcement were set in place to offset welfare costs, often at the expense of low-income non-custodial parents, with little ability to pay or fight back. If these are the metrics by which we judge success, TANF and child support enforcement have been remarkably successful. We know, however, that TANF has done little to alleviate childhood poverty. Program participants that increased their income through working lost welfare benefits, and now are working harder to stay just as poor. Likewise, targeting child support enforcement against low-income, non-custodial parents without the ability to pay doesn't increase the probability that payments are going to be made. Except for transitional job programs, subsidized employment, the child support enforcement system is punitive and antagonistic. TANF and the child support system have great potential to solve child poverty with reforms to make them more generous with their aid, more inclusive of different family structures, and more flexible with their work requirements. It's just a matter of choice.